soon as you think you've done enough research, you're only halfway there. You need to do more. And you need to really act as if you're already currently running the business and find out where those holes are. Because if you could be where I was a year into my business when you first start, which I think some entrepreneurs can be if they just know more, it's a great system. And I would also ask to speak to other startups in similar, industries. Not someone who would be a direct competitor, because that could be strange, but if someone is willing to say, look, if it's me as CBD and someone's launching a different type of nutrition supplement, like approach someone like me who's obviously willing to share, but learn where these holes are. Like I can listen to, as much expert advice, but if I can't really see where other people have made mistakes, it's very hard. And that's why I think it's such a great question. I think it's very hard to then know what your potential mistakes are going to be. So as soon as you think you're done, you're only halfway there when it comes to preparing to launch or actually make it happen.
Hey everyone, this is Devin Miller here with another episode of The Inventive Journey. I'm your host, Devin Miller, a serial entrepreneur that's grown several startups into 7- and 8-figure businesses, as well as the founder and CEO of Miller IP Law, where he helps startups and small businesses with their patents and trademarks. If you ever need help with yours, just go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time with us to chat. Now today, we have another great guest, Brooke Alpert, if I can say it right, hopefully. Brooke was a competitive horse jumper competitive show horse jumper in high school, then went to college and did writing as well, majored in psychology, went to work for Vogue magazine, then to Teen Vogue, went to New York working for a while, and then went back to school for a period of time, and then went to be into being a dietitian. Husband has some health issues and moved over into the cannabis and CBD world. So with that much as introduction, welcome on the podcast, Brooke.
That is me in a nutshell. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Well, let's unpack that nutshell a bit. I packed everything into 30 seconds. So why don't we go back a bit in time to when you were doing a competitive or show jumping and go from there?
Sure. So, I was the barn girl. So I would leave high school early every day and head over to my horses where, I'd help take care of them as well as train so we could compete all, around the tri-state area and more. And it really, I think that it's any sport in general is so important for kids. I have 2 daughters. They both figure skate. I just think anything that you have outside of school really helps with confidence, really helps with independence. I think it's an incredibly important skill set to learn. And I'm grateful for it. Mine was certainly unique dealing with live animals and the time that it was required, but I'm really, really grateful for it. And high school was funky for me. I fit in, I didn't fit in all at the same time. So, but I was always very—
I think that just about describes everybody's high school experience, or almost everybody's. So now you say, okay, you did, that was high school experience. You did the show jumping. And I think that you even did that as you started out in college. Is that right?
Yeah, I rode all through college. I went to a very small school called Goucher College that had an amazing equestrian team. And that's why I went. And it was a great, going from a small school and really living at a barn more than anything, it would have been a big jump to go anywhere else. So this was a really nice step to move to like a small liberal arts school with an incredible team and a great coach.
Oh, and that's awesome. That sounds like it was a great opportunity. And so now you're saying, okay, go do that throughout high school, do it in college. It's a great opportunity. It sounds a lot of fun. And then in the meantime, you're saying, well, I may not be able to do this as a full-time gig when I graduate. And so I have to get a degree in something else. And so you went into psychology or majored in psychology. And then, help us understand how you went from psychology in college to working at Vogue magazine. That may be a great fit. It just wouldn't have been the first thing that came to mind for a psychology major. So how did you kind of make that transition?
It's a good question. I came into college being a biology major. I was convinced I was going to be a vet. Like I never lost that idea that I had as like a 4-year-old kid, right? And then I got creamed during classes my freshman year, just creamed. And between having to keep up with my classwork for, the pre-med world as well as keeping up with the team, I was drowning. But I loved a psychology course that I had taken there, a teacher. It's funny, all of the things that have really affected me in life, it's always when there's that one teacher that just sees you for who you are. And every so often you get a teacher that sees you when you feel like nobody else does. And I just really connected with the psychology head there and really loved her and felt very like welcomed and accepted into her program. And I dove headfirst into it. And I'm grateful for it because it was a great, I mean, no one's going to ever not use any sort of psychology classes, right? Like for the rest of your life. But you know, when I left school, I went and I got a job. I moved right to New York City, where I was from right outside of the city. And I somehow, during one of my internships over the summer, was in the magazine industry. So I had a little bit of an in. And so my first job that I was offered and accepted was at Vogue, because you don't turn that down when that comes your way.
No, and I said it's a big magazine, well known, and you know, and I agree that there's a lot of psychology. One of the complete a side note, but I think is I always find psychology interesting. I always look at it more from the buyer psychology of, you know, how you make decision making for making a purchase, and what is that process and how people think about it and what is subconscious versus conscious. And I always love to dive into that. So I think that definitely makes sense. There's a lot of overlap there. And so you say, okay, good opportunity came my way, decided that I couldn't pass it up type of a thing. So you go to work with with Vogue. And what did you do with Vogue as far as, did you use your psychology degree, or kind of what did you do when you were there?
I mean, I used my degree in order just to like help me survive being like, you know, a young 22-year-old new to the city, new to this life. It was a pretty, you know, there was no warm up time. You know, you were really sort of thrown into the deep end. And I was so ignorant about what I was getting myself into. But I ended up loving it. And I had a great boss. And she was also taking the lead of they were doing like an insert of Teen Vogue into the regular magazine of Vogue every couple of months. So maybe it was quarterly or twice a year. And so I was already had like a little bit of an in with Teen Vogue. And so it was great to get to watch her, you know, it was a startup magazine basically, but it had the foundation of the name Vogue. So it was very cool to see the startup world from that aspect. But at Vogue, I worked in the beauty section. So I was, you know, doing beauty writing, beauty editorial, meeting with PR teams. It was a great, you know, it paid terribly, but it was a great like way to sort of like meet people in the city, because, you know, I was introduced to people like, you know, 17 times a day. It was great.
No, and it sounds like it'd be definitely a fun opportunity. So now you say, okay, you've done that for a while. Now you transition from just a Vogue magazine to what is Teen Vogue. So, you know, what was the genesis for that transition, and, you know, how did that go for you?
So my boss was the editor in chief of Teen Vogue. So while they were just doing it as like a addition to regular Vogue, I was already working with her, and I really enjoyed working with her. So when she had the opportunity to leave Vogue to really run the startup of Teen Vogue, I hopped in with her. You know, she offered to take me with her. So then I became, you know, the assistant to the editor in chief. So it was a bigger title, a bigger promotion for me, more responsibilities. I'm very type A when it comes to my organizational skills. So it was a really good fit as well. And the cool thing was, while I was there, I got to sort of really learn more about the other departments, where I was really just stuck in beauty editorial. And it was really fascinating to get to learn, you know, about what other sections were doing and what could possibly be of interest to me in the future. Ironically, when I was really ready for the next step and to get a promotion, my boss was not ready to lose me as her assistant. And so she kept sort of holding me back. But I'm grateful for that, because if I had continued to go up in the ranks, I probably never would have looked to change, right? So all of a sudden I started thinking about what else were my passions, and nutrition was definitely one of them. So from there, I basically started taking nighttime classes just to see if I would be okay going back to school and learning about dietetics and nutrition. And then when I never got that promotion officially, I was like, I'm out, and I went back to grad school full time.
No, it makes sense. You know, I get it on both sides. On the boss, I do a great job and you're helpful, and I want to keep you in this position because there's impactful. And on the other hand, you're saying, hey, I want to have the ability to expand and grow and have other opportunities, and I don't want to just be, you know, stuck, so to speak, in a given area and never have an opportunity to rise. And so, you know, it makes sense why you go back to school, started exploring that, and then, you know, as that opportunity never came available, to finish that up. So you come out of school now as a dietitian, and how long did you do the dietitian, or what did you do to get started as a dietitian? How long did you do that for?
Sure. Well, graduate school took 4 years. So in order to become a registered dietitian, it also includes like a full year of what we call like it's called the dietetic internship, but it's basically like a residency. So I was working in the hospital. Um, I was really sort of like thrown into the clinical dietetics world, where my real passion was going to be more in the community, working one-on-one with people, less clinical, more health focused, more, wellness. So after the 4 years, at that time, I had already met my husband. We were engaged to be married by the time I got my master's and my full degree. So we didn't own property. We only had like a small rent to pay, or small by New York standards.
Big by Utah standards, but at least small by New York standards.
Yes, by New York. Yeah, for the two of us, to be living in a one-bedroom apartment, we were living like a very nice life. And so at that point, he's like, listen, if you're going to do a startup, if you're going to launch yourself, this is the time to do it, because there's mortgages, weddings, babies, all in our future. And so I dove in and I started my own practice with nothing. I rented a tiny office twice a week, and I had to wheel my scale in and out of the closet in the beginning, because I shared it with a psychologist who thought a scale would be traumatizing to their patients. So
there may be some truth to that. It might not have the right impression. But
totally not wrong. But I mean, I still remember, like, I'd be like all dressed up in the outfit I'd want to be in, trying to look this part of something that I really felt like I was an imposter for, trying to like wheel this giant doctor scale in and out of the closet each time. But I started with no patients, and slowly, got one, and it just sort of built and snowballed into I needed to move and get a full-time practice and associates. And, it was a really lovely growth. And then I could just expand as I went. So it worked out really well.
Oh, and it sounds like it was a great timing and a great opportunity. So now you do that. And how long did you build your practice for? How long were you doing that?
I still have my practice, even though it's really one of the small percentages of time that I spend my energy on now. But it's been 15 years. So, and in that course, I've written 3 books, 2 best-selling. It's been quite. It's been an amazing experience for sure.
Yeah, no, and I think it's fun to build a practice, and then you also have opportunities that come along the way, and you kind of expand, almost as you kind of did with the cannabis and CBD, and you're saying it feels to some degree like a natural extension out. And so now help us understand. So you're building your practice, being a dietitian, that's still going as of today, and then along the way, I think you mentioned your husband started to have a bit of health issues, and how did that evolve into getting more into the cannabis CBD world?
So, I always say, like, I'd come home feeling so satisfied with the work I was doing. I had other, new happy patients. I had people feeling better, telling me that, their aches and pains or whatever their issues were gone. And then I'd come home to my husband, who was struggling. And in hindsight, he's been sick much longer than we ever realized. We just always had something else to blame it on. Oh, he's not a good sleeper. Oh, he's in pain because he hurt himself, But if we're totally honest with ourselves, we were kind of blind that there really was something brewing. And eventually he was diagnosed with a severe autoimmune disease that basically prevents him from standing or walking for any period of time. About 8 years ago, it spread to his arms. It was originally just in his lower legs and feet. It spread to his arms and hands right around the time of our second daughter's birth. So it's been, living in New York City and having a husband who can't walk very far. It's a challenge. So it really did interfere with our quality of life, and his chronic pain is a big deal. Being married to a dietitian, and I think you and I spoke about this offline earlier, like, it's no fun being married to a dietitian when you've got some health problems, because I was on that poor guy. Really, like, find research that said like gluten-free, dairy-free, grain-free. I was throwing everything at him just to try to give him some comfort, and nothing really worked. And I eventually put him on an insane diet called the Walls Protocol, which is an incredibly effective diet for people with MS. His symptoms are very similar to MS. So I was like, well, this isn't going to hurt. And I just tortured him. He was eating liver and red cabbage for most of his meals. He really he hated me at some points. So the joke is that he fired me as his practitioner, but kept me on as his wife and his baby mama. So, you know, it's very hard to stand back and watch your partner struggle and not be able to help. I mean, you know, even something like if he couldn't open a jar, like, you know, I want to jump in and help. And I'm sure people can relate to that, right? And telling me to back off was a real challenge. It was almost harder for me to deal with than like the reality of his disease. So I backed off, but during that time, I'm always doing research. And that's when I luckily stumbled across some really cool information about CBD and pain. And eventually I just approached him after I got my facts straight enough. And I said, I don't know what this is. I don't know much about it. It's made from pot. And he's like, all right, this I'll do. And
Sounds like fun. Why not? If nothing else, we'll have a good time.
he's like, you've never offered me this. So, and it was the first time that anything I've ever recommended or anyone has recommended besides pain medication has given him relief. And that's when I knew I needed to learn more. And, you know, I'm a science nerd at heart, right? That's always where my passion has been. I like research. I like proof to say what I'm doing, right? Like I like facts. Like I drink this because I know it's good for me based on these like 17 studies. So I started doing more and more research on my own. And the more research I did, the more I realized like I need a full education. So I went back and enrolled in this awesome program and became certified as a cannabis practitioner. And while like I was doing my certification and studying, and it was incredibly intense, I fell in love with CBD. My degree like would give me, you know, I could work with people with medical marijuana. I could really sort of expand outside of CBD, but I fell in love with CBD and it's what helps my husband. And it just was, you know, anytime that was like part of the coursework, I was like double focused on it. So I found like a new passion within a passion already, which was pretty cool.
Oh, that is cool. And you know, it's one where I could get that in the sense that, you know, my wife always hates when I play the lawyer type of a thing when I'm sitting there and I'm arguing and debating and poking holes, and it's more of like it gets frustrating to her because she doesn't want to have discussions with the lawyer. She wants to have discussions with her husband. And so I have to kind of, to the degree I'm able to, which is difficult for me, kind of turn that off and just have a normal discussion or turn off that part of the way that I like to approach or solving things. And I can only imagine there's probably something, you know, some overlap or similar to what you found of, hey, I don't need to, sometimes I don't need the dietitian. I just need the wife and the spouse and that type of thing to help me through this hard issue. But it's also great that you're able to kind of continue to figure that out or find a solution that works for him. And then also find that expounds onto your passion. So that kind of now brings us a bit up to where you're at today. And so you have the continuing to do the cannabis CBD or part of the practitioner. You're also running the dietitian. So now you kind of say, okay, that's what I'm doing today. If you're to look into the next, 6 to 12 months, where do you kind of see things headed, or what's the next part of your journey?
Really, for the last like 4 years, it's been, I'd say 90% cannabis and CBD, 10% nutrition. And it's so easy to fall back on nutrition because it's fast. I can do it quickly. Like it's old hat, right? And the money is solid. And in a startup world, like I constantly need that. But I find that it really distracts me from my focus. And that when I spend too many days with a couple of patients and preparing for those sessions, I really lose a lot of my focus for my own business. So it's a really hard tightrope. So I'd say now 5% of my time max is spent on the nutrition side of the world. I use it more now with my daughters so I can torture them instead of my husband about why that, boxed food isn't good for them. But yeah, it's mainly the cannabis world that I'm in. And what happened was falling in love with CBD and seeing what it did for my husband was, mind opening. And I could find tons of products for him, but I couldn't find anything that would make sense for someone like me to take. Right. So learning about what CBD can do for anxiety, for sleep, for stress relief, all of those things were what I personally would always deal with and what most of my patients in my practice were dealing with. So I couldn't find something that felt like not medicinal, that didn't feel like a product for an illness, versus I wanted a product for wellness. So like my husband is sick, right? That he has a true disease. He needs help. He takes these pills, right? He takes these tinctures. All of that makes sense for him. But I already take like enough vitamins. I didn't want another pill. I wrote a book against sugar. I couldn't create a gummy, or it didn't feel authentic to eat or consume, or recommend gummies. So it was really hard to find like, well, where's CBD? And then there were like vapes, but I'm like, I'm literally a health, expert. Like this vaping is not happening for me. And I have children. So what I realized was missing in the field was really a CBD product that met all of like the obnoxious standards that I have, right? But that especially was, focused on wellness, right? Where I'm not fixing my husband's autoimmune disease with my own product. I'm not changing, someone's psychological makeup or taking them away from the meds that they may or may not need. But where are people like me and the hundreds of people that I saw in my practice? What kind of product would be meant for them? And that's why I created Daily Habit.
No, and it sounds like that, it's fun to kind of hear that going through all of that and what that journey was that led up to. And then it kind of also puts you on maybe a trajectory that you hadn't necessarily thought of, but is one that you find that you enjoy and are passionate about. So that's definitely a fun journey to hear and or for you to share. Well, with that, now as we kind of reach, to where you're at in the present, even looking a bit in the future, now is it kind of reaches that point of the podcast where I always ask two questions at the end of each journey. And so we'll jump to those now. So the first question I always ask is, along your journey, what was the worst business decision you ever made? And what'd you learn from it?
I think I've made a bunch of worse decisions.
There can only be one worse. There could be a lot of bad decisions, but only the worst is one.
I think the hardest thing for me, moving from really just like a single practitioner, right? Or even the people that worked for me, my business model when I was just doing nutrition work was really simple, right? How many people could I see in a day? What was really expected? What was my overhead? Like it was very, very simple. And it was really all based on the amount that I was able to work, because I could work up to 20 hours a day if I wanted, and I could make that money. Moving into e-commerce and moving into a consumer product was a world that I didn't even realize how different it was. I thought I understood numbers. I thought I understood business because I had run mine really, really well, right? I was doing incredibly well as a dietitian. It's a completely different animal shifting over into a consumer product, company. And I just didn't know enough going in. And I thought a lot of it I could wing, and I couldn't. And so that first year, I made some decisions, and I'm proud. I chose no outside investors, even though we had some offers, because I wanted full control. I really made all of those decisions, but my ability to know where the holes were in the business, right? Of like knowing, I didn't even know what I didn't know. And so that's where like I have had like the steepest learning curve and some of the hardest times, because I wasn't even aware that I needed to be doing so much more. It was shocking to me as someone who is a workaholic and I get it all done, that there were so many like things that I was missing. So I really could have used a little bit, perhaps more time, although I don't think I should have taken more time because of this market, right? But a really more of a deep dive or a crash course more so. I was so focused in creating and the science and the development of the product and the communicating and the writing about it, which is what I specialize in, the public face of it, that there was a lot of the business end that I just could have done better. I think like legitimately one of the worst decisions were right at the height of the pandemic is when we launched our single serving to go packets, which were like, oh, people will bring these on their way to coffee shops, like that was supposed to be this big launch that timing wise was terrible. It was a great product, but the timing was terrible. So I can definitely say that was a bad decision in hindsight. But I think just not having enough of my ducks in a row to know what I was missing when I first launched was the worst mistake I made.
And I think that's always a hard balance, on multiple kind of competing interests. In the one sense, you want to get things out in the marketplace. You've done it in other areas, and you're saying, and a lot of times you don't even know where I'd go to get more of the information. And so you kind of say, well, I've done this before. I've run other businesses. I've been successful. And it gives you a bit of that false sense of security. And so then you get going and I've done that multiple times as well, where you find out there's a lot more involved, or a lot of things that you didn't know and you didn't figure out, and sometimes it's years down the road before you really said, well, it would have been really helpful if I'd known this before, and yet you have to get going somehow, and you dive in anyway. So that's it's certainly an understandable to make, and a mistake to make, and one that's great to learn from. Second question I'll always ask is so if you're talking to somebody that's just getting into a startup or a small business, what'd be the one piece of advice you'd give them?
As soon as you think you've done enough research, you're only halfway there. You need to do more. And you need to really act as if you're already currently running the business and find out where those holes are. Because if you could be where I was a year into my business when you first start, which I think some entrepreneurs can be if they just know more, it's a great system. And I would also ask to speak to other startups in similar, industries. Not someone who would be a direct competitor, because that could be strange. But if someone is willing to say, look, if it's me as CBD and someone's launching a different type of nutrition supplement, like approach someone like me who's obviously willing to share, but learn where these holes are. Like I can listen to, as much expert advice, but if I can't really see where other people have made mistakes, it's very hard. And that's why I think it's such a great question. I think it's very hard to then know what your potential mistakes are going to be. So as soon as you think you're done, you're only halfway there when it comes to preparing to launch or actually make it happen.
No, and I think that's it's a great takeaway, because to your point, you can do a lot of research. Now, I don't know that you can go to the extreme, and I'll caveat it with, you can get so research paralysis, or you always are looking at it so much. And I'll see occasionally you'll meet people that, hey, I've been working on this or thinking about it for 10 years, and well, at some point you have to say, I'm never going to know everything. But I think that the other thing is to continue, or to learn as much as you can, push it as far as you can, get going, but then don't just turn it off and say, well, we'll figure it out as we go along, but continue to learn and to grow. And I like the idea of going out, and it could be somebody in the exact same industry, but at a different marketplace. Maybe it's geographic location. So go 5 towns over, someone that you're not going to be a competitor with, but learn a lot of mistakes. Or to your point, if it's someone, hey, this is something that they are going to be a competitor, then go find a similar vertical and go learn that from them. And I think that it gives you the ability to learn from others, as opposed to having to always make those mistakes yourself. So I think that's a great takeaway. Well, as people, if people want to reach out to you, they want to find out more, they want to be a customer, they want to be a client, they want to be an employee, they want to be an investor, if you ever decide to take on investors, or they want to be your next best friend, what's the best way to reach out to you, contact you, find out more?
Everything can be found at our website, which is dailyhabitcbd.com. So everything there. If you want to invest, come on over right now, because I think my mind has definitely changed after 3+ years of doing it solo. But dailyhabitcbd.com.
All right. Well, I definitely encourage people to reach out, connect, and otherwise find out more, because it sounds like it's a great opportunity on all fronts, to whether it's anxiety, health, or you have specific needs, or if you'd like to work there or be an investor. So, or maybe just make a new friend. So definitely check them out at their website. Thank you again, Brooke, for coming on the podcast. It's been fun. It's been a pleasure. Now, for all of you that are listeners, if you have your own journey to tell and you'd like to be a guest on the podcast, we'd love to share your story. So go over to inventiveguest.com, apply to be on the show. A couple more things. Make sure to click subscribe, leave us a review, and share it as much as you can, because we want to make sure to help out as many startups and small businesses as we can, and share all the stories along the way. And so with that, if you ever need help with your patents or your trademarks or anything else with your business, feel free to reach out to us at Miller IP Law. Just go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time with us to chat. Thank you again, Brooke, for coming on the podcast, and wish the next leg of your journey even better than the last.
Thank you so much for having me.